In the year 2455, on a routine training mission, a team of students is about to discover a life form frozen in time.
Wow.
They're on their way back. Prepare for docking and power up the lab.
You brought him on board?
Everything's under control, ma'am.
What the hell is going on?
Jason Voorhees, that's what's going on. He's an unstoppable killing machine.
Guys, it's okay. He just wanted his machete back.
How do we get off the ship?
I don't know.
Look, we're gonna be all right.
What? Are you high?
Uh-oh.
He's here. You have got to get them out of there.
Hey, Slappy! I think we're finally okay.
What the hell is that? You've got to be kidding me.
Oh, wow.
He's been modified. Oh, you think? You guys might want to run. I don't think he's out there.
Why don't you just stick your head out and have a peek?
Welcome back to Geek Channel 8. I'm Eric, and today with me is Tank from the What You Into podcast.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Yeah, Anthony Tank Manson here from What You Into podcast, a podcast about hobbies and collections and hobbies.
Great. So we've been on each other's podcast before. I think we talked about podcasting on yours, and we talked about Conan and Conan the Destroyer on mine. But even back then, I had today's episode in mind, which is we're going to be talking about Jason X, which is a bit different from the rest of the Friday the 13th series, and we'll talk about that. Why don't you tell me what's been going on in your world?
Right now I'm working on a series of blacklight drawings they've been creating. So I just finished up this big 24-inch by 18-inch Godzilla piece, and I recently started 11 by 17 Leatherface piece. So that's been a lot of fun. I kind of had this moment where I didn't know what I was doing art-wise for a while, so I just started experimenting with fluorescence, and it's really taken off for me. So I'm enjoying doing that.
Cool. All right, let me give a background to the year this movie came out. It was 2001. So I'm going to start with a little info starting back at the end of 2000. Some things having to do with the exploration of space. In the 1960s, they made the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. Well, there are at least going to be astronauts on space stations, and we do have that. So November 2nd of 2000, the first resident crew entered the International Space Station. So that became a reality. February, the near Shoemaker spacecraft touched down in the what's called the saddle region of 433 Eros, which was a near-Earth object, and it became the first spacecraft to land on an asteroid. In April, the Russian spacecraft Soyuz TM-32 lifted off from Kazakhstan, carrying the first space tourist, who was Dennis Tito, an American entrepreneur. In August, the Genesis probe was launched from the Cape Canaveral Space Complex. In September, American spacecraft Deep Space One flew within 2,200 kilometers of Comet Borrelly. October 15th, the Galileo spacecraft passed within 181 kilometers of Jupiter's moon Io. In November 9th of 2001, in Spain, the movie Jason X premiered. Before we get into that, I want to give a little production notes to it. This is cribbed from an interview I found on the AV Club. It was with Todd Farmer, who's the screenwriter for this movie. And they asked him what made this the idea you decided to go with, Jason in space. And he said that Sean Cunningham, who's basically been the producer of all the Friday the 13th films, was frustrated with how long the development on Freddy versus Jason had been. And he finally said, screw it. Let's I'm paraphrasing here. Let's make our own movie until they get it right. And Todd Farmer said, this is a quote, "We actually had the idea, and I don't know how legitimate it was, but we certainly laughed about it, that Jason would break out of hell, but he would have the help of Gilbert Gottfried, who was also in hell playing Gilbert Gottfried. And it would be just this weird ass sidekick team breaking out of hell and Gilbert trying to keep him calm when he's killing everybody. And we thought after the 9th movie, why not?" So that was the first idea.
Oh my God. Why does horror have so many bad ideas? Like, I mean, how do you look at that and not just go, this is dog shit from the jump?
I know. I could you imagine? Thank God they didn't make that film. Okay. And so then what was the saving grace of that was that, and I'm quoting Todd here again, he says that he was worried that, quote, "I didn't want to do something that then their movie," meaning Freddy versus Jason, "had to either ignore or deal with us," is what he said. Quote, "Let's set this thing in the future, like 400 or 500 years, and let's do something kind of sci-fi with it because that's never been done," unquote. And then he said, quote, "Originally it was sort of a Blade Runner world. So the world has advanced and somebody finds Jason cryogenically. So then the producer said, we can't afford to create what you're talking about." And he said, "What about Alien? I mean, that's just a warehouse that's designed to look like a cargo ship."
Yeah.
And so that's where it came from. It was, you just take out the aliens and put in Jason. So we didn't have truckers in space. We had a school bus in space. At least that was the original concept, unquote. And I can see that, right? When you see this movie, you're like, oh, they did aliens, but took the aliens out and put Jason in.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think that if you look back at the series, like even with 8, where they go to New York, and that was, I think it was like Vancouver or something where it's very obviously not NYC. But they, even with that, like the original script, they had like all these big ideas of like Jason at the Statue of Liberty, Jason in Times Square, which they do end up shooting, Jason on the subway, all this stuff, and it just couldn't happen. So I can't believe that they were like, hey, we're coming off of 9, which is by far the worst movie in the entire franchise. Let's who is going to give them Blade Runner money? Like who's signing that check?
Yeah. You know, this whole series that we're doing right now is on franchises that go to space.
Yep.
And so my original thought was with when we did Moonraker, which is the James Bond in space, and we did Hellraiser Bloodline, which is the Hellraiser movie in space. So my original thought was, is this what franchises do once they've jumped the shark? Like they go to space?
Yes.
Or, okay, the thing about all 3 of those that I just mentioned is that there are fans that say, this movie's really better than you give it credit for. And I actually kind of like this one. And I had heard that about Jason X.
Mm-hmm.
It was the only one I hadn't seen in the original series. And then I was listening to your program, and you had a couple of creeps on there.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember Lady Creep. Sorry, I don't know her name.
Wait, actually, I kind of like Lady Creep. We'll just go with Lady Creep.
Okay, so Lady Creep, who's the wife of the couple of creeps. By the way, they have a YouTube show. Check it out. I think it's called A Couple of Creeps.
Yeah, it's a couple of creeps. It's extreme horror. So trigger warning: if you don't want to see incest or horrific murders or rape or cannibalism, don't look at their page. But if you want to go into the deep end of the pool of horror, by all means, go on over and check it out.
Okay. Well, Lady Creep on that show had mentioned that she didn't like Jason X, not because of plot holes or anything like that. Her reason was the in space didn't work for her. Mm-hmm. And I thought about it and I was like, well, wait a minute. There's Alien. That's in space. That's pretty good. You know, and I think that there's this idea out there, and I'm not speaking for her, but there's this idea out there that people have that like horror has to be in an old haunted house or on Earth. And I'm thinking, what about ghost ships on the ocean? What about, space is just another place. I don't think of there not being horror there. I think maybe we're so used to science fiction films always being, in the Star Wars model where there's not really horror, you might get a monster attack, but that's the closest you get,
Right. You get something that's kind of funky looking, like in the Star Wars movies where it's like you see like a Rancor monster or something like that, or like the pigs guards at Jabba's palace, where it's like, oh, it's kind of scary, but it's not, but it's never like played in that thing where there's never like dramatic music or, jump scares or anything like that. Sci-fi just occasionally has some fugly looking things living in the sci-fi world.
Right.
I'm with you to some extent with this. I'm with her to some extent. I think space works if you begin in space. Like if you like something like Alien, where like it obviously takes place in space, that makes sense. Or like Event Horizon, where it goes along with like that ghost ship thing you're talking about, where it's like, hey man, there's this thing, it's floating out here, the crew's dead, we don't know what happened, we got to go on it. I think those are like really high watermarks for like horror and sci-fi combined together. But then it's like when you get into the horror stuff where it's like, well, we've kind of exhausted everything we can do with this. Let's put it in space. That's when you get stuff like Hellraiser in space or Leprechaun in space or Jason in space. And it's kind of like, the fuck is this? Because it is like just such a weird place to put them. It's so out of the element of what the series is. So I always kind of, I'm on that line of like, whenever something is in space, I'm always like, oh, I got to put my shark jumping shoes on because we're getting ready to get into something funny. And I think that's kind of one of the things with Jason X is like, you got to be able to laugh at this movie, and this movie laughs at itself. And if you're coming into this thinking it's going to be super serious, like the original stuff, like 3 or like the 6 or 7, it's not that. It knows what it is. And that's what makes Jason X a lot of fun.
Since you're a much bigger fan of Jason, let me break down my sort of opinion on the Friday the 13th series that up to this point, and then it gives you an idea of where I'm coming from. So here's how I kind of rank the Friday the 13th films in 4 tiers. Okay. Top tier is for me is the first film. Okay, it's the original Friday the 13th. I remember I didn't see that at the time. I was too young, and I saw it when it was repeating. It came back to theaters in the early 90s. And I saw it, and there was a trailer for it. The trailer just has like 1, 2, 3, and it counts down all these people being killed, right? I'm like, okay, this is pretty badass. But it had the final tagline, "You may only see it once, but once is enough." And I burst out laughing. I was laughing in that theater because by that point there had been like 8 films or something like that, all pretty similar. But anyway, so that's top tier for me, is the first one. The second tier for me is part 2. Part 3, which is my personal favorite. So I'm
3 rocks.
3 was the first one I actually saw. I saw it at a friend's house, and it was like on pay-per-view or something like that.
Yeah.
And we had to watch it in his dad's bedroom, his parents' bedroom, which, by the way, later on, I learned his father was a Nazi, like an actual brown shirt Nazi. So like we were watching this in like a real monster's room, but we watched it. And the thing that made it so terrifying to me, first of all, you get the hockey mask for the first time, but also, it was 3D, which we didn't have on a home viewing. But I remember one of my friends turning to me and saying like, this shit takes place in the day, that's what makes this really scary. Cause this could happen, it's like every other horror movie had been at night, including the earlier installments in this series, but this one's the middle of the day. And that made it that much scarier because like, and of course we were growing up at a time when there were a lot of serial killers in the 80s and stuff like that. So it's like, that was our reality anyway, so that, and I'll throw in 4, the final chapter. That's
4 is
like
great.
Second tier for me. All right. So that's still really good. And 3 is my personal favorite, even though I put it in the second tier. Then there's the third tier. And this is the next level down. I put A New Beginning, Jason Lives, and The New Blood all at this level. This is like the next level down.
I like The New Blood.
You do?
Yeah. You keep going with your list. I'm going to give my list after you give your list. But yeah.
So that's third tier. So all in order so far, pretty much, right? Fourth tier for me, and this is the bottom of the barrel. Jason Takes Manhattan, which is my least favorite in the entire series. Because
rough.
it was a bait and switch, because I wanted to see Jason in Manhattan. They put him on a fucking boat. Like, and I was like, that is like, you basically just lied to us with the title. And then Jason Goes to Hell, which also sucks. And I saw Freddy versus Jason after this.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen Jason X deliberately because I knew it was in the future. And I liked the time. I wanted to follow the timeline and then see that one out of order. But okay, that's my list. Why don't you tell me how you rank these?
So I like 3 and I like 4 a lot, and I also like part 6, Jason Lives. Those are my top 3. Those are my ones that I like going to. I love just the brutality of Jason in 3, where we finally get fully realize like the Jason that we all know now, like you said, the hockey mask, and also just like the big brooding Jason with some really vicious kills, some really brutal stuff going on there. 4 is great because we get a young Corey Feldman, shout out Feld Dog, and we get that terrific kill at the end where like Jason is breaking into the house and Corey Feldman tricks him by shaving his own head to look like him, and then they machete Jason in the head, and then we get the machete through the face of Jason just to really put through, no, he's dead. And then 6, where we get the new version of Tommy Jarvis, which is Corey Feldman's character, who then for some reason resurrects Jason, which I don't quite to this day understand why he would resurrect him to kill him, but here we are. But that was a lot of fun. So I like those. I like part 7, the New Blood, just because we get this weird like Jason meets Carrie angle. Like I think that's kind of a cool thing where you pit Jason against this character who can like levitate him, can shoot objects at him, and we get like this thing where it's kind of like a wizard versus a barbarian, where it's like they're 2 different skill sets, but they're both really good at what they do. So I enjoy that. That's also where I would put 1 and 2. Again, we don't get fully realized Jason and what Jason becomes, but you know, without 1, the series doesn't exist. And 2's got a lot of great stuff in it, including where that kid in the wheelchair gets hit in the face with a machete and goes down like 40 flights of stairs, where the fuck that kill is, which is amazing. We also get Baghead Jason, which is a lot of fun, which is a cool Jason variant that we don't get to see very often. And then, yeah, man. And then after that, things start to go bad because then we get into Jason 5 New Beginning is just rough. That's where we get like the weird not Jason. Instead of having the red chevrons, he has the blue chevrons on the mask. And then at the end, spoiler alert, we find out that it was like some weird paramedic guy. It's not Jason.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't get with that. But it is nice that does lead into 6, though, where like 6 is big because in the first few movies, there's always that thing with Jason where you're like, is he a human? Is he a mutant? What exactly is he? Is he just like a tough dude that can eat a bunch of punishment, or is he something otherworldly? And then in 6, that's where Jason does make the jump to something otherworldly, where now he's like a zombie character that can absorb all this damage. He has the ability to like, if you're running from him, he'll just like shadow teleport and show up right beside you anyways. So we start getting into like the weird stuff with Jason. But I'm with you. 8's a rough watch with him in New York. I mean, it's a fun idea, but it's not realized very well. And Jason Goes to Hell is just the absolute bottom of the basement. That movie sucks. It's really hard to like MST3K watch that thing. And even if you try to make fun of it, it's still a boring slog of a movie.
Yeah. And they made him like a slug or something.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
It was this whole weird thing where like now Jason is like a soul that can be transferred to other people. And it just gets a little too far outside the wheelhouse of what Friday the 13th is. But that's what brings us to Jason X, which is way fun. Like, and again, this movie is very self-aware of what it is, because there's been 9 of these things and they're like, okay, I think people are on the joke at this point.
With my bottom tier being Jason Takes Manhattan, Jason Goes to Hell.
Yeah.
You can see that once we're outside of Crystal Lake, I am checking out. So I was wondering what my opinion was going to be of him in space, because that's about as far from Crystal Lake as you can get.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they kind of had me hooked at the beginning. I don't know why you would put a research facility at Crystal Lake, but okay, I bought into the idea that they're like, okay, we tried killing him, that didn't work, we're just gonna freeze him. That actually makes some kind of sense, you know?
I like the fact that he's on like the CIA's radar, where it's like, look, we know about this thing, we need to contain this thing, like we got to keep this thing at this summer camp and not let it just go roaming out into the countryside.
Yeah. But what happens here is, just like in Aliens, the army wants to use it as a weapon. Same thing here. They want to use his healing ability or whatever. So the army shows up to take over. you can tell they just cribbed the notes from Aliens, and they're like, okay, change this to this and change that to that. And
I really wish we lived in a world where Weyland Yutani was in Aliens, Blade Runner, and Jason. That would be great.
well, it kind of is if you just imagine that's what they are. But anyway, what I should say about this is this came out at the time Dimension Films was making a bunch of stuff like I Know What You Did Last Summer, and like it was in the wake of Scream. So this is like a new era of like glamour lighting horror. It's got a really polished look to it.
Yeah, and to go with that, that's like the whole thing where like Scream really did redefine the genre where Scream was very self-aware. All the characters in Scream were aware of what's happening. They weren't dumb victims. And that changed the slasher genre, because before then everybody was just kind of dumb and making bad decisions. Whereas in Scream, it's like, oh no, like they realize what they should and shouldn't do. And some of that starts to come into this film as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that the very first Friday the 13th film is really cool because like it's the old campfire tale thing, and you can believe it's like it looks like it was a shot at a summer camp. It looks kind of low and grainy and all that. This is not that.
No.
But it's in a polished future, so I can go with that lighting look. It's just, but where it loses me kind of toward the beginning here is Jason escapes, of course, and the doctor who's studying him, I think Rowan was her name, she like puts him back in the freezer, right? And he machetes through a like steel door or something like that and into her, and then of course they both freeze because it leaks out, but whatever. But I'm just like, okay, now the machete is magical and it can go through steel. Like that was like, if they hadn't done that, if he had just like blocked the door from shutting or something, I could have lived with it, even if he had blocked it with the machete blade, but stabbing through the door and into her, I was just like, that's just a little too far.
Jason is, he defies physics. He defies all things. The PSI pressure of a Jason machete through a door, totally believable in this world.
Okay, if you say so. So that takes us into the far future. So this was already the future for the time it came out, but it was not that far in the future.
Right. And as you said earlier, with like them, they knew they were going to make Freddy versus Jason, but they didn't want to fuck with the timeline too much. So it was like, this movie comes out in like what, 2001, 2002. And so they set the movie in 2008, in the far-flung future of 2008. And then that's when, like you said, the freezing happens. Then they like fast forward to me like 400, 450 years. And so we're time hopping all over the place in this movie.
Yeah. All right. So 450 some years later, there's this spaceship that is carrying students and their professor. And for some reason, soldiers, which we don't even know about until they call them in. But
this is how college will be taught in the future. Classrooms will just be on spaceships that orbit the Earth.
I can dig that.
I'm not against this idea.
So anyway, they're studying Earth because everybody's moved to another planet, Earth 2, because Earth 1 is all polluted.
That's right.
And we have a professor. We have the professors like TA. We have the students, of which I don't even know how many of them there were, like 6 or something.
They're just meat bags there to be murdered. That's what they are.
And one of them has an android, KM-14.
Yeah, who has horrible mom hair. And she's kind of like a weird mixture between like a Terminator and a Fleshlight.
I thought she was kind of like a Terminator Karen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a weird thing. Yeah, and that's the other thing about this movie is very early 2000s. Like they're like, it's 400 years in the future. You look at the haircuts in any of these characters, you're like, this is early 2000s. This is exactly what point in time this is in.
They thaw out the doctor. Jason. Well, both of them.
Both of them. Yeah.
Yeah. The doctor's like, oh, you can't do that. Get rid. It's like, so the whole movie long, I'm expecting them to do the airlock thing where they push him in an airlock and shoot him out into space. And like, I'm kind of glad that didn't happen exactly like that, because that is totally what you expect for the whole thing. Cause that's what I would do. It's like, what? Let's shoot him out in space, Right. Instead, the main guy, the professor dude or whatever, he decides he's the, what was that dude that was working with Wayland Yutani in Aliens that like the one that like
Oh,
made
the
sure
business
that
guy.
yeah, the yuppie guy.
Oh fuck. He was on a sitcom, like not Harry Met Sally, but
Yeah, no. Paul Reiser was his
Paul
name.
Reiser. Yeah, Paul
Yeah.
Reiser. Yeah, and he plays a character where his whole thing is like they're trying to bring the alien back to so Weyland Yutani can use as a bioweapon. Like that's the whole thing in Aliens is like, hey, the crew's expendable, just like in Alien One. Like, you know, whatever we got to do to get an egg or something back in so we can take it to Earth, and then Weyland Yutani will figure out how to make it a bioweapon.
But he's all into it, Paul Reiser's character, because he's going to make a bunch of money off of it. Well, we got the
Exactly.
same, that guy is the
Yep.
professor guy in this who talks to his buddy on a
Yeah.
space station somewhere, and the guy tells him like, oh,
The
this
history
is
of
Jason Voorhees,
Yeah.
is a famous serial killer. A collector will want him, you know, because in the future, like, I guess instead of collecting little figurines, collectors collect, you know, the actual frozen bodies. I don't know.
Yeah, that's how it works in the future. Like you get Jeffrey Dahmer's head, like put in one of those canisters from Futurama, and you know, you gotta Manson one of those on the shelf, and you got Jason.
Stuff starts happening rapidly here.
Yeah, things escalate very quickly once we get on the ship.
One of them, I think it's the scientist lady, he freezes her head in the sink of liquid nitrogen or whatever, and then smashes it,
Yeah,
which is kind of an unusual kill for Jason.
so that one is argued as that one usually gets it's always in the top 5 Jason kills, and that's one that gets argued as the number 1 Jason kill of all time, just because of how unique it is and how cool it is. And what's funny about that scene is she's kind of, you know, just like check his vitals, see what he is, doing an autopsy on him. And then as she's doing this, there's 2 other characters having sex in a different part of the ship. And then apparently that's like an alarm clock for Jason. Like if you're having sex anywhere near Jason, it will wake Jason up. And he immediately comes up. She doesn't see him. And then she has this nitrogen thing, dunks her head, and it instantly freezes it, pulls her head out, and then just smash. And then she explodes into a mixture of like ice cubes and blood all over the desk. And it's like, hell yeah, dude. Honestly, if I went opening weekend and I paid my $7.99 in 2001 to see that, I got my money's worth.
I remember that the screenwriter was talking about how like Cunningham, the producer, did not want Jason revived by lightning again or anything like that. And he's like, well, what if 2 teenagers are having sex? And they're like, okay, yeah, you know, that revives Jason. I'm like,
that tracks.
Okay. The teenagers are just as bad as from the 1980s or whatever. They have sex for no reason at a moment's notice, you know. And I mean, there's the stoner guy. I don't know if he's actually a stoner, but he's a stoner, you know. And so you know that something's going to happen to him, you know.
Jason X has taught us that premarital sex and weed never go out of style.
Yeah. Anyway, so they decide that they're going to have to call in these soldiers who happen to be on their ship anyway.
Of course.
And you get basically, you know, the same thing with Aliens. You know, we've already got the android and the greedy guy who wants Jason preserved. And now you got sort of the space marines.
Yeah, you got the colonial marines showing up. Yep, 100%.
And then there's the Doom reference. Did you catch that? The BFG?
The BFG? Yeah.
I'm like, okay, Doom must have been really hot at the time. Still.
Again, 2001. It's like solid shout out right there. Yeah, man. And which this movie is just so self-aware of itself, and then also just pop culture at the time.
Yeah. Now, what I didn't like about its self-awareness is it got a little too cutesy. So a lot of the lines of dialogue, like Jason drops this guy onto a giant drill bit.
Oh, yeah.
And he goes, you know, first of all, why are there giant drill bits in the middle of this ship? I have no idea, you know. But
it's the future.
He drops him on one, and then they're like, the line is, he's screwed.
Yes.
I'm like, okay, yeah.
There's only one man that can deliver that line, and that man's name is Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now, if Schwarzenegger's in the movie, it looks like you're screwed, then that would work. But here it does not.
Yeah, I mean, they have lines like that ought to do it, which is supposed to be a zinger, and it just isn't. And this sucks on so many levels when there's like the vacuum, you know, of space.
Yeah, I forget that character's name, but she is by far like the worst part of this movie with her self-awareness. Like there's being self-aware, and then there's like over the top where she is just constantly saying shit that's like wink wink nudge nudge, you get it, and it's like, okay, chill, like take it down a few notches.
Yeah, some of the acting is really bad too. So the fact that they're not good actors combined with the corny lines, that's just a recipe for cringe. There is occasionally a really good line. I like the one where he's like, "You're lucky you weren't alive during the Microsoft conflict," which is, you know,
Yeah,
I guess could still happen. You know,
there's also a great part where the android is like trying to explain Jason to the people on the ship, like who he is, and she references his hockey mask, and she's like, hockey is a sport that was outlawed in 2025 or like something like that. Like she references that hockey was actually outlawed as a brutal sport, which is kind of funny.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I could totally see that happening some point in the future. You
I
know,
mean, they already took fighting out of it. Don't take the rest of hockey. Just let us have something.
yeah, you got. I mean, I'm conflicted on stuff like this because I produce hockey games, you know, and so I'm like super into it. But this is my deal with roller derby. It's like those are our friends, and I don't want to see them hurt. But then,
Right.
honestly, roller derby's at its best when it's at its most violent. I mean, that's just like my thing, you know. It's like, um, and I remember I took my wife, now wife, wasn't wife at the time, when we lived in Grand Rapids, to a Grand Raggedy versus Windy City, and like 3 girls were taken out on stretchers in one bout, and I'm like, okay, yeah, it's getting a little bad.
Yeah, it's that weird thing where like we still have the monkey brain where like we want to see the Roman Colosseum, but we don't want to see death. Like I want to see big hits, but I don't want to see somebody taken out on a stretcher. I don't want to see somebody hurt. And I feel like that's something that we struggle with within all contact sports, NFL, NHL, MMA. Like it's all that where it's like we want to see the big hits, we want to see knockouts, but at the end of the day, we don't want to see somebody seriously injured or long-term effects. And then that also gets into the whole thing of like, well, you know what you're signing up for, because there is also that side of it. Like when you start doing extreme sports or you start doing contact sports, like if you're going to do it, you got to accept that's part of the risk, is you might get injured or you legit might die.
Yeah, and this actually just happened here. We had a coach at the team that I cover who he was really big on helmets. He was around for a long time, so he like instituted all these regulations with helmets and you know, trying to prevent concussions and things like that. He retired and then got in a bicycle accident not wearing a helmet.
Oh,
and
dude.
yeah, and passed away, you know.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he was one of the he's the winningest coach in the history of the college, you know. And but so it's like, but I kind of think, you know, he had to have known what he was doing getting onto a bicycle without a helmet, considering so much of his career was about that, you know. So I mean, you take your chances. I'm sure there's like, I don't know, you would know better than me, but I'm sure there's a ton of stuff they have to sign saying, you know, I could die, you know.
Oh, yeah.
I'm agreeing to do this, you know.
For sure. Any sport that you're willing to play where it's full contact, there, especially in, you know, 2023, the year of our Lord, you got to sign a bunch of waivers saying, hey, if I, you know, something bad happens, that's on me, you know. And that's just the reality of it.
So to bring it back to
Jason.
the Friday the 13th series, I think that's one of the cool things about these and why slasher films are so much fun, is because you get to see people getting killed and maimed and all that stuff. It's not real, but it satisfies that same kind of itch without, like, you know, without putting anyone anyone in real harm, you know.
Indeed. And that's exactly what I'm looking for, especially when I come into like something like the Jason movies. I want to see people get wrecked.
Yeah. So the Marines get picked off. I don't know if they're Marines, the soldiers, the guys with guns, they get picked off one by one.
Yep.
And the remaining students and professor, they decide to like separate the sections. It's like a 2-section pontoon thing. Yep. And they trap Jason on the other one. and he lands on what we already know is this auto doctor thing where little nanite robots reconstruct you. Why they left him on that, I don't know, because as soon as they are gone, all the little nanotech robots start rebuilding him. And we should say what happened to him. Basically, the KM-14,
Right. Yeah.
she like gets upgraded by her person to be
Yeah.
like this badass who she comes out with like bandolier belts of like Full Metal Jacket bullets, which she never uses. I guess they're just for show.
You gotta look the part. You gotta look the part.
But she like basically kicks his ass and blows away most of his head,
Yeah.
Her own head gets punched off, but still functions. But they leave him on this thing, and there isn't enough Jason left for the little robots to reconstruct him like as a human. So they start incorporating mechanical parts, and they basically create cyborg Jason.
Yeah, so this version of Jason is referred to as Uber Jason, which is a cool way to look at it because we've seen Jason in various ways. Like we've seen him in jumpsuits, we've seen him in the bag head, we've seen him where he's kind of just wearing like a green, like military long sleeve shirt. We've seen zombie Jason in a variety of movies, but we haven't seen this. And this is a major departure from anything we've seen now. Where like basically Jason is now like kind of part Terminator. Like he kind of looks like a mixture of like Hulk Hogan fuck the Terminator. Like he's just this gigantic monster metal covered thing. And can we talk about the contact lenses, the super sweet red and yellow eyes that we now get with Jason? That's frightening as hell. And we also get a new Jason mask, which is also exciting because normally with Jason, like if you're going through the movies, you get like kind of the standard mask with the chevrons and the triangle in the middle. And then, I forget if it's in 3 or 4, but we get like the hatchet slash into the side of it. And that's kind of really only it in terms of like, as it changes over time in like big memorable ways. But in this one, we get a whole new mask, we get a whole new Jason, which is phenomenal.
Yeah. You want to take us home and tell us how this ends?
Sure. So after we get Uber Jason, he starts picking off more and more people. Like we talked about, the lady cyborg gets her head knocked off, and now she's down to just being a head. So this dude's like running around with like he looks like the professional wrestler Al Snow with the mannequin head, where he's like she's with him, and they figure out that it's the lady doctor that we started the movie with. It's the guy with the cyborg head, and then it's the dude who is like the head of the Space Marines. And I totally forget his name. Super tall, ripped black dude. That's awesome. Like the whole movie, he's kicking ass. And they set up this thing where it's like, that him and Jason are eventually gonna, lock horns, and this is the battle to be had. But as they're trying to like set this up so that they can like get Jason off of the ship, they plug the android's head in, and she makes this great virtual reality thing where you get this virtual reality environment where like now Jason has been transported back to Camp Crystal Lake, and there's these like 2 really hot women that pop up, and one is like, hey, do you want to do some underage drinking or smoking pot? Let's have premarital sex. And they both like jump, they both take their tops off in front of Jason. They jump into a sleeping bag, and then they pan out to like the other characters watching it, and Jason like is just kind of standing there just very confused and just like, what the hell? And they're like, all right, I think we got some time to figure this out. And then it cuts back to Jason has now, so they're both in sleeping bags. Jason is beating, is holding up one of the sleeping bags and smashing the one woman in the sleeping bag into the lady on the ground in the sleeping bag and just beating them off of each other. And then once the lady on the ground is dead, he then takes the sleeping bag he was using to beat the lady on the ground with and smacks it against a tree.
Yeah.
Which again, phenomenal kill.
And also this is how self-aware this movie is. They're like,
it's
even
callback.
The characters are like, yes. It's like, because they had to know all of Jason's motivations and stuff like that, and they're like, let's have 2 girls and they have them take their tops off and like all that. And I'm like, okay, yeah, they know Jason.
Yeah. So we get this thing. We also get this thing where this like rescue ship shows up to save them, and it looks like the Jason mask, which is also fun. Like I want to live in a world where spaceships now just look like hockey masks. That's pretty cool. And then instead of just like the standard airlock scene, we get the head of the Space Marines like jumps on the back of Jason and rides him down like what's the movie how I stopped worrying, learned to love the bomb. Dr.
Yeah, Doctor Strangelove.
Yeah, he totally does the Dr. Strangelove thing, but instead of riding the bomb to Earth, he's riding Jason through the stratosphere, and it ends up him and Jason both get ripped apart. Finale of the movie is we get now the Uber Jason mask dropping into Camp Crystal Lake, and it floats to the bottom of the lake, and that's where it now lives.
Yeah, so I think we'll see someone pick up on that someday. Overall impressions here, where does this fall for you? Where do you put this on our tiers?
It's pretty high up there, man. I will put it up there. Like 4 and 6 are my favorites, but I'd put it on the same level, just a smidge below it, on the same level as like 7, because again, I really like the whole Carrie idea. It's one of my favorite Jasons. It is very self-aware. It knows what it is. And it also proves that like Jason is a character you can take and put anywhere. Recently on my podcast, I was talking to my buddy, Justin 3000 Stewart. We were talking about different comic books, and he pointed this out to me, and I was like, oh shit, you're right. He's like, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Batman are two things that you can put into any storyline and it just works. And I was like, holy shit. Yeah, you can really make Batman or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles like travel through time. It works anywhere you drop them in. Predator is the exact same way. And this movie does that with Jason. It's like, you can literally put Jason anywhere and it works.
I would put this 3rd tier, but I almost see this as a different thing. It doesn't feel like the rest of the Friday the 13th to me. This almost feels like a alternate universe, like like this is a parallel universe, Jason. That's what it feels like to me.
It makes it feel fresh and fun because you get something just a little outside of what you're used to. It's not just, hey, guess what? Jason's back and he's at Camp Crystal Lake and these teenagers are there and now they're going to die. It's like, okay, we've seen this. We've seen this so many times. Now we get Jason in space. It's like, oh, okay, this is something a little different.
The other thing I liked about this, and I'm going to tell a little story here because I'm going to take us down a little sidebar here, but I was in a small town in Indiana and I was basically in line to be seated at a Waffle House in the morning and all the booths were taken. And so the guy in line behind me is like, hey, you just want to share a booth? And that way we can both sit down. And I'm like, yeah, let's do that. Okay. I did. The guy's name was Harry Manfredini. And
shit.
Yeah. He was like giving a lecture about how to score music for movies. And we started talking and he told me his story and how he came from like Chicago and moved to LA, or was originally doing commercials, but he wanted to do film. And like his friend was like, well, what do you have that these other guys don't have, and he was, at first he thought the guy was dissing him, but then he realized what he was saying is you got to have your own thing. And one of the first projects he got was this movie, Friday the 13th, the original one. And told me how he came up with like, so he's like, yeah, this is supposed to be the voice in his head saying kill and ma. And he was worried that he would spoil the ending because that. Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. This is a spoiler alert. Fast forward about 5 minutes if you don't want to hear the spoiler. All right, we're spoiling the ending right now, but Jason's mom is involved.
You've had 40 years, listener. You've had 40 years. Come on.
So he was worried they was going to spoil the ending, but he chopped it down. He reverbed it the hell out of it. But his score is like nothing else, man. He comes from a classical music background, so he was so like, good. I went to he talked me into coming to his talk. I'm like, dude, I don't know. I'm a visual artist. I don't know anything about music. I love it, but I don't know anything. He's like, just come. I came and he was talking about playing in minor chords and all these things that you do when you're scoring movies and different kinds of movies. But he's classically trained, but he's also like not afraid to do weird experimental shit. And so if you go back, there's horror movies before Friday the 13th soundtracks, and then there's horror movies after Friday the 13th, and it changed everything. But even in that, he's got like one foot in the old style and one foot in the new style. And some of the films he more or less phoned it in, but not this one. This one, I think, like, he updated the score really good, with some electronic sounds that fit the like sci-fi nature of it. That's one of the things that I think is really good about this particular film. It's self-referential. It's got this new take on
100%.
Friday the 13th, but it has this awesome score too. And that ticks it up a notch for me too.
Agreed, man. Agreed. I have the original on vinyl. I have the original Friday the 13th soundtrack because of that, just because he kills it. It's so good. It's so iconic. Like, you hear that music, you instantly know what it is. It gives you the goosebumps immediately with the cha 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 cha. It's just he's so good.
I mean, some of the other films, like, they put good bands on the soundtrack, the Dream Warriors and stuff like that. Some of
the hell yeah, dude.
But as far as score goes, nothing tops Manfredini's. Like, yeah.
Oh, what was the 80s hair metal band that was on Dream Warriors?
I don't remember who that was off the top of my head, but
I totally forget too. I was thinking Lion, but Lion was the Transformers movie. So it's not Lion. I think it might have been Dokken, or
I think it was Dokken. Yes, it was Dokken. Yeah.
Hell yeah, Dokken.
Yeah. Anyway, but as far as just pure musical scores, like, Manfredini's stuff like harkens back to, I remember he and I were talking about, he asked me at that breakfast table, like, what's your favorite musical score composer or whatever, and I said Bernard Herrmann, who did Psycho and all that, and it turned out that was his big influence. So that's what got us starting talking down that rabbit hole. It was a really great time. We stayed at that Waffle House that was overcrowded anyway. Like, we were monopolizing a table for a long time just because we were talking about horror movie music,
stuff.
Yeah. All right. So is there any last thoughts you have about this? I think it's highly rewatchable. It's definitely one that you can have people over for beers and rewatch it, which I can't say about all of them.
Yeah, no, Jason X is very much a super fun movie. Get some beers, pack a bowl, chill with your buddies. Like, it is a super self-aware movie. You can laugh at it. You get incredible kills. You don't really have to pay that much attention to it. It's great. So I'm a big fan of Jason X. If I can throw one thing out there, do you know about the Never Hike Alone series?
No, I do not. I've heard it. I've heard that before, but I don't know. Maybe it was on your podcast, actually. Yeah.
So listener, if you're into the Friday the 13th stuff, and because after this, it kind of gets a little weird, because after this we get Freddy versus Jason, and then we get then they did the reboot, and like it was like 2009, 2010. Remember that was like a thing for a while, where like all the slasher movies got rebooted in like the early 2010s.
Yeah, you know why that is?
No, throw it at me.
Besides just to make money, a lot of people don't realize this, but a lot of these franchises, they do not want their copyright or their license to the copyright to expire. So they can make a dog shit movie just as long as they make a movie, so that resets the clock, so that's why that's why particularly at that time we were getting a ton of reboots, and it's still going on now with other properties.
I mean, I'm not naming names here, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but that's definitely happening. And that was like a problem with like the Friday the 13th series, is like that exactly what you're talking about, the copyright, where now it's in copyright hell, because you have the people that originally made Friday the 13th #1, and then you have the guy who did #3, where you get like the iconic Jason with the mask, and they're arguing over who owns the property outright, where it's like, well, hey, you did these first two movies, but they were like, a mom and then like a guy in a bag head, and then I made the Jason that is like the commercially understood like Jason, like, it's Jason's become this thing where, like, when you think of like slasher horror movie Halloween stuff, he is like Hulk Hogan, or he is Tony Hawk. He's the default dude that is what you think about when you think of like scary movie slasher guy. It's Jason. And so because of it getting held up, we're like, now they can't make a new movie because of all this. There was a fan that made a series of movies called Never Hike Alone. And Never Hike Alone is based on this idea of, the first one is a guy who has a travel vlog, and he is like traveling in the woods and camping, and it's shot all like first person, like kind of like Blair Witch Project kind of deal. And he's like, oh, I discovered this thing on my map called Camp Crystal Lake. I'm gonna go check it out. It's closed, it's abandoned, I'm gonna see what it is. And then he runs into what's called Ghost Jason, which is like this weird new version of Jason that's pretty creepy looking, pretty cool. And it's now spawned like a series of these movies that you can watch for free on YouTube. And the sequel, Never Hike Alone 2, dips into the idea of Jason in winter, which is something that was supposed to be like when they talked about doing like Friday the 13th, 13, like when they were talking about doing like the next sequel, that was the idea, was to like have Jason exist in winter, because we've never seen Jason in the snow. And because it never got made, that's what Never Hike Alone did. They ended up making like a Jason in winter show. So
Cool.
check them out. It's great. They're a lot of fun. They're really good, and give them support. They even like bring in the guy who played Tommy Jarvis in like number 6. Like he's he's part of this thing now. So listener, if you want to see something cool and you want to support independent cinema, check out Never Hike Alone.
Yeah, cool. It's weird where like now fans have the access to the technology to be able to make stuff that, like, Star Trek fans have been doing this for years and stuff like that, and Batman fans and stuff like that. So you're getting a lot of stuff from fans that it's like, wow, that's, like, I mean, that's better than some of the stuff that they're putting out in the official franchise,
100%. I watched something on YouTube that was, somebody made like they designed a Terminator thing where it was a video of like a bunch of survivors in the future hunting one of the hunter killers. And it's incredible. Like, it totally looks like something out of like when you see like in Terminator 2 and Terminator 1, where like Cameron bounces to the future and you get to see like what Skynet looks like in the post-apocalypse. Like, it totally hits that aesthetic, and it's incredible. So definitely, and like you said, the Batman stuff. Oh my God, you can find Batman fighting aliens, Predator, Darth Vader, whatever you want on YouTube.
Yeah, it's great. Okay, well, thanks for joining us for this special Friday the 13th episode. We normally don't release episodes on the 13th, but this one's going out because, when else are you going to release it?
You're going to do it.
You want to plug whatever you got going on?
Sure, man. If you want to find me online, you can go to my Instagram at Neil to No One is the easiest place to find me at. It's got all my links to all my stuff in my link tree. I also have a podcast called What You Into. Again, I interview people about their hobbies, their collection, their fandom. Right now, we're in spooky season. So this month, my buddy Jamie came on. He's doing a bunch of episodes with me. We did an episode with you where we're talking about Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead. We also just wrapped an episode. We're talking to my friend Dustin, who owns Earth to Kentucky in Kentucky, in Covington, Kentucky, which is a whole store that's dedicated to like vinyl art toys, and sometimes there's horror toys mixed into that, which is a lot of fun. And and then this week I'm talking to my buddy Simo. He's gonna come on. He's gonna talk about being one of those dudes that makes like the incredibly scary horror yard in the suburbs. You know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah.
There's always that one neighbor in the neighborhood that has like basically a crime scene on their front lawn from October 1st through October 31st. He's that guy.
Yeah.
So if you're into horror, come over for the month, check it out, and stick around, because at this point I got over 100 episodes for you. They're all evergreen. You can pick them up where you want, and each one focuses on a different hobby or collection.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us. And I want to let our listeners know, if you want to write to us, you can at GC8 podcast. That's letter G, letter C, number 8 podcast at gmail.com. And then just spread the word, let people know about the podcast. That's the only way we can get out there these days. I think all the big companies have taken over podcasting. So now like breaking out on the algorithm is just impossible. So
word of mouth is where it's at, dude. You honestly, listener, if you're a fan of this podcast, tell a friend. Like, it really does help, because if you throw something out into the algorithm, it just gets swallowed up.
Yeah, once upon a time that wasn't true, but now like people saw there was money to be made in podcasting, and like every media company now has a podcasting arm.
Yes.
HBO has a podcasting arm, Sony has a podcasting arm, So this is real grassroots right here. All right, until next time, this is Eric.
I'm Tank.
And Have a good Halloween.
Hell yeah. If you're having sex anywhere near Jason, it will wake Jason up.